Floating plants are often sold as some of the easiest plants you can add to an aquarium. You place them on the surface, give them light, and in theory, they should spread so quickly that you soon have more than you know what to do with. Yet, for a surprising number of fish keepers, the exact opposite happens. The plants arrive green and healthy. Then within days, the leaves turn brown, the roots shorten, the growth slows down, and the entire colony seems to disappear. That can be incredibly frustrating because floating plants are supposed to be the simple part of a planted aquarium. The good news is that they usually are simple. When they fail, the cause is often not mysterious at all. In most cases, one small part of the tank is working against the plant every hour of the day. The filter may be pushing it underwater. Condensation may be dripping onto the leaves. The surface may be too turbulent. The light may look bright to you, while barely reaching the areas where the plants actually sit. Or the aquarium may simply be too clean to support the amount of fast growth you are asking for. In this video, we are going to work through the most common reasons floating plants die, how to identify each one, and what to change before you waste money replacing the same plants again. And stay with me until the final part, because one of the most overlooked causes happens before the plant ever enters your aquarium. It explains why some people can copy every recommendation perfectly and still watch a new batch of floaters melt away. The first problem is also the easiest to see. Floating plants hate being treated like underwater plants. Their leaves are designed to sit at the surface, with the top side exposed to air. When a filter repeatedly pushes them below the water or splashes them from above, many species begin to decline quickly. A single brief dunk is not usually a disaster. The real problem is repetition. Imagine a small red root floater, or delicate salvinia, being pulled into the same current every few seconds, soaked, pushed beneath the surface, released, and then dragged back again. The plant never gets a stable place to grow. New leaves are constantly disturbed, older leaves stay wet, and weak specimens begin to melt. This is why a tank can have perfect lighting, good nutrients, and healthy fish, while the floating plants still fail. The problem is mechanical. Watch the surface of your aquarium for a full minute. Do not just look at where the plants are resting at one moment. Follow them. Are they slowly being pulled toward the filter? Are they spinning around the tank? Are they repeatedly disappearing under the outflow? Are small droplets landing on the leaves every few seconds? If the answer is yes, fix the movement before changing fertilizer, lighting, or anything else. One of the simplest solutions is a floating plant ring. This creates a calm zone on the surface and keeps the plants away from the strongest current. You can also do the opposite and place a barrier around the filter outlet, allowing the plants to move freely everywhere else while protecting them from the area that causes the problem. The exact design does not matter as much as the result. You want a section of surface where the plants can stay upright, remain mostly dry on top, and develop roots without being thrown around. In many aquariums, this single change is enough to turn a dying colony into rapid growth. Species choice also matters. Some floating plants are far less tolerant of splashing than others. Delicate species can look beautiful in a calm tank and terrible in a tank with a powerful hang-on back filter. If your aquarium naturally has more surface movement, and you do not want to redesign the filtration, choose plants that are better suited to that environment. Certain Salvinia species are useful because the surface of the leaf is covered with tiny structures that help water roll away rather than sit on the plant. They are not indestructible, but they often handle occasional splashing better than very delicate floaters. Riccia can also tolerate a surprising amount of disturbance in some setups, although it behaves differently from the classic floating plants people usually imagine. The important lesson is not that one species is always better than another. The lesson is that the plant should match the tank. A low-flow aquarium can support fragile floaters that would struggle near a strong filter outlet. A higher-flow tank may do better with tougher species, or with larger plants that have more substantial root systems. Many people keep replacing the same plant over and over because they like the appearance, even though the aquarium itself is telling them that the species is a poor match. Before buying another batch, ask a better question. Instead of asking which floating plant looks best, ask which floating plant fits the movement, temperature, lighting, and stocking level of this particular aquarium. That small shift can save a lot of frustration. The second major problem is the lid. This surprises people because a lid seems harmless. It keeps fish from jumping, reduces evaporation, and helps stabilize the aquarium. But for some floating plants, a solid lid can create exactly the environment they dislike. Warm, humid air becomes trapped above the water. Condensation forms on the underside of the glass or plastic. Then droplets fall back onto the plants. Depending on the species, the result can look similar to filter splash damage. Leaves stay wet, damaged areas begin to brown, and the colony gradually weakens. There is debate among aquarists about whether the main problem is the high humidity itself, the dripping condensation, reduced air movement, or a combination of all three. From a practical point of view, you do not need to solve that debate before fixing the tank. Look at what is happening above the plants. Is the underside of the lid covered with water? Are droplets constantly falling onto the same area? Is the space between the water and the lid extremely humid with almost no air movement? If so, the lid may be part of the problem. Removing it completely can help, but that is not always safe. Bettas, killifish, hatchetfish, and many other aquarium fish can jump, especially when startled or when water conditions change. A better compromise can be a mesh or grid cover that prevents escape while allowing more air movement. You can also lower the water level slightly if the tank design allows it, creating more space between the plants and the lid. The goal is not to make the aquarium dry. The goal is to stop the leaves from spending their entire lives under a ceiling that keeps raining on them. Interestingly, once healthy floating plants become dense enough, they can create a soft, natural cover that makes some fish less likely to launch themselves through an open surface. But that should never be treated as a guarantee. Fish safety still comes first. Another common source of confusion happens with tissue culture plants. A beginner buys a cup of floating plants, opens it, adds the plants to the aquarium, and then panics when the leaves look strange. Some leaves may be folded, others may be pale, brown at the edges, or shaped differently from the mature leaves shown in photographs. That does not always mean the plant is dying. Tissue culture plants are produced in highly controlled conditions. They grow in a sealed environment with very different humidity, nutrient availability, and physical support from what they will experience on the surface of your aquarium. When they are moved into a tank, they need time to adjust. Some older growth may look poor before the plant produces new growth that is better adapted to the aquarium. This is especially important with floating plants because people expect immediate perfection. They assume that anything brown means melt, and anything that does not double in size within a few days means failure. Resist the urge to keep disturbing the plant. Do not move it from tank to tank every day. Do not change the light, fertilizer, flow, and temperature all at once. Give it a stable place and watch the new growth. Old leaves tell you what happened in the past. New leaves tell you what the plant thinks about the tank now. If the newest growth is becoming healthier, flatter, greener, or more consistent, the plant may simply be transitioning. The real warning sign is when the new growth is also smaller, weaker, damaged, or disappearing. That is when you should start looking for an ongoing problem rather than a temporary adjustment period. Now we come to surface flow. This is related to splashing, but it is not exactly the same thing. A floating plant can remain above water and still struggle if the roots are being dragged through strong current all day. In some tanks, the plants spin in circles. In others, the roots are constantly pulled sideways. You may see long roots becoming shorter, torn, or tangled. The exact biological reason floating plants respond poorly to strong root movement is still debated by hobbyists. It may involve physical damage, stress, reduced efficiency of nutrient uptake, or several factors working together. What matters is the pattern. If the plants grow well in a calm corner and poorly near the outflow, the tank is giving you useful information. You do not need a laboratory to see it. Again, a floating ring can create a protected zone. Redirecting the filter outflow can also work. A spray bar can sometimes spread the movement more evenly rather than concentrating it in one aggressive stream. Even a small adjustment in the angle of the outlet can change the entire surface pattern. If the tank must have strong circulation, consider larger floating plants with longer and heavier roots, such as Amazon frogbit or water lettuce, where legal and appropriate. Their larger root systems can sometimes tolerate movement better than tiny, delicate floaters. They also provide another advantage. Long roots reach deeper into the water column, giving the plant access to nutrients across a larger area. In the right tank, those roots become part of the visual appeal. They create shelter for shrimp and fry, catch fine particles, and make the aquarium feel more natural. But remember that stronger roots do not make a plant immune to a filter that is constantly throwing it underwater. The objective is still balance. You want enough surface movement for gas exchange and filtration without turning the top of the aquarium into a washing machine. The next problem is one of the most important because it can feel completely backwards. Floating plants can die because the aquarium is too nutrient poor. Many people hear that plants clean water, absorb nitrate, and help control algae. All of that sounds positive, so they add a large mass of fast-growing plants to a lightly stocked aquarium. Then the plants slow down, become pale, shrink, and begin to disappear. The tank may look clean on a test kit, but from the plant's perspective, it can be a desert. Floating plants grow quickly because they have direct access to carbon dioxide from the air and strong access to light at the surface. That rapid growth requires nutrients. Nitrogen is one of the most obvious, but it is not the only one. Plants also need potassium, phosphorus, iron, magnesium, and other elements in appropriate amounts. A low fish load, small feeding amount, frequent water changes, and a large quantity of fast-growing plants can create a situation where nutrients are consumed faster than they are replaced. This is especially common in shrimp tanks and small betta aquariums where the biological load is low. The first step is to look at the entire system. How many animals are producing waste? How much food enters the tank? How much plant mass is growing? How often are you changing water? Are there other fast-growing plants competing for the same nutrients? A nitrate test can provide one clue. It does not tell you everything, but consistently undetectable nitrate in a heavily planted, lightly stocked aquarium may suggest that nitrogen availability is very low. The solution does not have to be complicated. In some natural planted tanks, simply feeding the existing livestock a little more appropriately, allowing the system to mature, or increasing the biological load within safe stocking limits can provide more nutrients. In other tanks, a complete liquid fertilizer is the cleaner and more predictable option. What you should not do is keep adding new floating plants to a system that cannot feed the ones already there. There is an important warning here. More fish should never be added only as fertilizer if the aquarium cannot safely support them. The fish are living animals, not nutrient machines. The idea is to understand the relationship between livestock, feeding, waste, microbes, and plant growth. A well-balanced, low-tech aquarium can recycle a large portion of the nutrients that enter through food. But balance does not mean maximum stocking. Sometimes, the correct answer is simply fertilizer. This is especially true in a tank with a territorial fish that should not have tank mates, or in a carefully designed shrimp aquarium where adding more animals would create other problems. The key is to stop treating low nitrate as automatically good and high plant growth as free. Plants are doing work, and that work requires raw materials. If your floaters were growing rapidly for several weeks and then suddenly began producing smaller leaves, shorter roots, and slower growth, ask whether they may have consumed the available nutrients. A plant colony can be so successful that it creates its own shortage. This is one reason regular thinning is useful. Removing part of the floating plant mass prevents the surface from becoming completely covered, protects submerged plants from being shaded, and reduces competition for nutrients. Healthy floating plants are often so efficient that neglecting to remove excess growth eventually causes the entire system to become crowded. Success can create the next problem. Now let us talk about snails. This topic is tricky because people often blame every snail for every damaged plant, and that is not fair. Many common aquarium snails spend most of their time eating algae, biofilm, leftover food, and decaying material. In a healthy planted tank, they can be useful members of the cleanup crew. But some snails, in some tanks, can damage the fine root structures of floating plants. The effect may be easy to miss because you do not always see a snail eating an entire leaf. Instead, the damage happens below the surface. Fine side roots disappear. The plant loses part of the structure it uses to absorb nutrients. Growth slows, and the plant begins to decline, even though the leaves initially look normal. Amazon frogbit can make this easier to notice because the long central roots may remain while the tiny side fibers are stripped away. Larger apple-type snails can also be more destructive around delicate plant material than smaller algae-grazing species. The mistake is to assume that all snails must be removed. First, observe. Are the snails actually damaging healthy roots, or are they eating dead tissue that was already failing? Are only certain floating plant species affected? Do the roots look cleanly stripped? Once you know there is a real problem, population control may be necessary, but avoid the two common extremes. Starving the entire tank by dramatically reducing food can create nutrient problems for plants and stress the animals you actually want to keep. Overfeeding, in the hope that snails will ignore the plants, can cause the snail population to explode. The better approach is controlled feeding, manual removal where practical, and choosing livestock carefully. Nerite snails are often a good option for planted aquariums because they are effective algae grazers, and most commonly kept nerite species do not reproduce successfully in ordinary freshwater conditions. The broader lesson is simple: diagnose before you react. A snail sitting on a dying root is not automatically the reason the root is dying. Lighting is another problem that looks obvious until you realize how aquarium lights are designed. Many lights are selected based on how well they illuminate the substrate. That makes sense because most planted tank owners are trying to grow stems, crypts, carpets, or other submerged plants. But the light distribution at the surface can be very different. A light mounted close to the rim may create a bright zone directly beneath the fixture, while leaving the front and back edges surprisingly dim. Floating plants naturally drift into those edges, especially when the filter pushes them away from the center. From your normal viewing angle, the aquarium still looks bright. The floaters, however, may spend most of the day outside the strongest light. Watch where the plants actually collect. Do not judge lighting from the center of the tank if the plants are sitting against the back glass. If they gather in dark areas, you have several options. Raise the light higher so it spreads across a wider area. Use longer mounting legs. Lower the water level slightly if the aquarium design allows it. Reposition the floating plant ring so the plants remain inside the useful light footprint, or choose a light with better surface coverage. Be careful not to respond by simply blasting the tank with maximum intensity. Floating plants sit close to the light and can receive more energy than submerged plants in the same aquarium. The goal is even coverage, not uncontrolled brightness. A stable photo period is also important. Constantly changing the schedule makes it harder to diagnose anything. Give the plants a consistent day and evaluate new growth over time. Temperature can also create confusing results, especially in unheated aquariums. Floating plants live at the boundary between water and air. Their roots may be in relatively stable water, while the leaves are exposed to the changing temperature of the room. A tank near a cold window can experience a very different surface environment at night than a heated tropical aquarium in the center of a warm room. Different floating plant species also come from different climates and do not share one universal temperature range. A plant that grows aggressively in one home may slow dramatically in another, even when the aquariums look similar. Cooler conditions can reduce growth, and prolonged exposure outside a plant's preferred range can contribute to decline. This becomes especially important when several floating plant species are mixed together. One may continue growing while another melts, leading the owner to assume the problem cannot be temperature because some plants are still healthy. But different species can respond differently to the same conditions. Check both the aquarium temperature and the room conditions around the tank. Think about nighttime, not just the warmest part of the day. If you are running an unheated aquarium, choose species known to tolerate the temperature range your room actually experiences, rather than forcing a warm, loving species into a cool system. This is another example of matching the plant to the aquarium instead of constantly modifying the aquarium to chase one plant. There is one more issue that deserves attention before we reach the final mistake, and that is complete surface coverage. Floating plants are often introduced because they absorb nutrients, reduce excess light, make shy fish feel secure, and create a natural appearance. When they are healthy, they can multiply very quickly. That success can become a problem. A solid mat of floating plants can block light from submerged plants, reduce open surface area, trap debris, create stagnant pockets, and make feeding difficult. It can also cause the floaters themselves to compete intensely for nutrients. The plants on top may remain healthy, while weaker plants underneath stay wet and begin to rot. Dead material becomes trapped, and the colony starts to look dirty and unhealthy. The solution is regular harvesting. Do not be afraid to remove healthy plants. In a thriving system, removal is maintenance. Keep enough open water for light, feeding, and gas exchange. Maintain the amount of floating cover that works for your fish, rather than letting the plants decide how much surface they own. This is especially important in tanks with submerged plants that require strong light. Floating plants are powerful tools, but they should be managed like any other fast-growing plant. The healthiest floating plant tank is not always the one with the most floating plants. Now we reach the cause that many beginners overlook because it happens before the plant enters the aquarium. Sometimes the floating plants were already unhealthy when you bought them. This can happen even when the label belongs to a respected nursery. The nursery may have produced an excellent plant, but the plant still has to travel through shipping, storage, retail display, and finally transport to your home. During that journey, it can be overheated, chilled, dried, crushed, left in poor lighting, or stored under conditions that are unsuitable for that species. By the time you buy it, the decline may already have started. Beginners often assume that a branded cup or pot guarantees that every individual plant inside is healthy. It does not. Learn to inspect the plant itself. Look for firm new growth, healthy color appropriate to the species, intact roots, and signs that the plant is still actively growing. Be cautious with a batch that is already turning transparent, collapsing, or producing a strong, decaying smell. Some cosmetic damage is normal, especially after shipping, and tissue culture plants may need an adjustment period. But there is a difference between a plant adapting and a plant that arrived in advanced decline. If you are unsure, take clear photographs before buying or immediately after opening the package. Ask experienced planted tank keepers for a second opinion. The earlier you identify a bad starting batch, the less time you will waste changing a perfectly good aquarium to solve a problem that began somewhere else. So what should you do when your floating plants are dying? Do not change everything at once. Start with the most visible physical causes. Watch for dunking, splashing, and strong surface flow. Check the lid for condensation. Look at where the plants actually sit in relation to the light. Inspect the roots for damage. Compare the amount of fast-growing plant mass with the nutrients your aquarium can realistically provide. Consider the temperature your room experiences day and night. Then look at the plant itself and ask whether it was healthy from the beginning. Make 1 or 2 targeted changes, then watch the newest growth. Floating plants respond quickly when conditions improve. New leaves become larger, roots lengthen, the colony begins to spread. That fast response is one reason they are so useful. They are not just decoration, they are also indicators of what is happening in the aquarium. When they grow aggressively, they can absorb waste nutrients, provide shade, create cover for fish and shrimp, and help compete with algae. When they suddenly decline, they may be telling you that something in the system has shifted. The best aquariums are not built by reacting to every small problem with more equipment. They are built by observing patterns, understanding the biology, and making the smallest change that solves the real cause. Floating plants can be among the easiest and most useful plants you will ever keep, but only when the surface of the aquarium is treated as its own habitat. Give them calm water, suitable light, enough nutrients, the right temperature, and a healthy starting point, and most of the problems people describe as mysterious become very predictable. The next time a floating plant begins to melt, do not throw it away and buy another batch immediately. Watch the surface. Watch the roots. Watch the new growth. The answer is usually already visible in the tank.